Thank you. And we do have Joe Bauman, our redevelopment attorney, here tonight, who's going to do a presentation giving an update on, this is for Third and Valley project.
Right, correct.
Mr. Bauman? So before we get to our public hearing, go through these.
Okay, great. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
This is a great moment for the village. I was looking at the timeline, and I think you began this process about 18 years ago, if you count the first resolution of the governing body to asking that the area be studied. So we're talking about Block 2304, lots 3 through 9. It's a 2.7 acre parcel. Everyone knows it as Valley and Third. It's the current site of a parking lot and pile of dirt. So as I said, the process began, we're going to give you a little history lesson. So the process began in 1995 when the trustees first directed the planning board to determine whether certain areas are areas in need of redevelopment throughout the village. You conducted public hearings through that year and ultimately designated a number of properties as redevelopment properties throughout the area. In 1996, you continued the process, ultimately adopting the Central Business District Redevelopment Plan, and then later in 2002 and 2008 doing subsequent amendments to address the uses under that plan. That sort of brings us to the more recent involvement where this was before we were retained, but the effort was set forth to put together an RFQ. I got to tell you, it was a pretty thorough, great job, by the way, the RFQ that was put out by the village. Nine entities participated as providing you with their qualifications that year, and then ultimately you sent out proposals and got 2 proposals. Among those 2 proposals, the superior proposal, as determined by the small committee that was formed to review them, plus ultimately the trustees, was the Jonathan Rose Companies. About a year, May of 2012, took us about a year to analyze the proposal and ultimately sign a conditional redevelopers agreement. And so since May 30th of 2012, we've been working with Jonathan Rose to pull together the redevelopment project. One of the first things that became clear when we began the process was we're going to have to do a new plan for this particular block. Well, you had a redevelopment plan encompassed many properties throughout the village, and it really needed something that was targeted for this particular piece of property. And so through 2012, we went through the planning process to adopt the redevelopment plan that was ultimately adopted in 2013. So the project that is before you for consideration today, it's 2 documents you're going to consider: a financial agreement, which deals with the payment in lieu of taxes, and then the redevelopment agreement. The project itself includes 521 space structured parking facility. There'll be 255 spaces allocated for public use. That is meant to replace all of the existing parking spaces on the existing lots that will be covered by the project, plus an additional number of spots, I think the number is 60 to 70 additional spots for use throughout the downtown. So we're actually going to be increasing the number of public parking spaces available to the public from what is there today. They'll have 215 residential rental units, including 21 affordable housing units. There'll be currently planned 16 studio units, 116 one-bedrooms, 81 two-bedrooms, and 2 3-bedrooms. The 2 3-bedrooms are the affordable housing units, a requirement of the affordable housing rules. There'll be 3,000 square feet of retail space along Valley Street. And then the building will vary from height to between 3 and 5 stories. This is all consistent with the redevelopment plan that you already adopted. At the end of the day, we have a true transit-oriented redevelopment project. Includes live, work. There's units that will allow you to work on the first floor and live above, parking, and then retail. So the project costs. The total project, the total investment in the village by the developer through debt and equity is $59.9 million. So this project is going to represent a $60 million investment in the village. The sources of that money, the redeveloper himself, the redeveloper joint venture is going to put up $17.7 million of equity. They have $41.9 million of debt, and then there's a New Jersey Green funding source for about $300,000. This is how the money is going to get spent. The garage itself is going to cost about $10.4 million. The mixed-use project, $35.1 million, and the balance is the soft costs associated with the project, things like engineers, architects, financing costs, interest carry, things like that. So one of the things, because this project involves such a significant public-private participation, is the redeveloper provided and was required to provide their financial information. So we know through that information, which is also included in the application for a pilot agreement, the expected rents. So they're hoping to get $1,580 for a studio, $2,060 a month for one bedroom, and $2,980 for a two bedroom. Their total estimated annual gross revenues, and this number is important as we'll discuss a little later because this is a number off of which the pilot is calculated at 10%. Their total estimated annual gross revenues is $57 million. Now, obviously that number will go up over time. $5.7 million. That number will obviously go up over time. As rents increase, the annual gross revenues will increase. The unlevered return on investment for this redevelopment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Baumann, is that number based on full occupancy?
95%.
95%.
95%. Plus it includes miscellaneous expenses like if there's fees to use a gym or the parking fees. So it includes it's all the revenues that the project generates.
And what's, I know you have a lot more to get to, but what's the anticipated time it takes to get to that point? From the time they cut the ribbon, the doors open, they rent the first unit, what's the?
We could ask them. I'm guessing 18 months to 2 years. What do you guys go that?
About 2.5 years.
2.5 years. There you go. I'm more aggressive.
Oh, from the time you break ground?
The stabilization.
No, you can't speak, they can't hear you, but from the time you open, you start renting units till the time you get to 95% occupancy. Okay. Thank you.
So the answer is 9 to 12 months?
Good point, thank you. People at home can't hear. Yeah,
Okay, this is a rendering of the project. You'll see this is the corner of Valley and Third. You'll see there's sort of is where the retail is to the left, and going down Third is where the live-to-work units will be, and the garage is all the way at the bottom corner. The financial agreement, which is the ordinance in front of you at this moment, provides for an annual service charge of which is estimated to be $570,000, which is 10% of the annual gross rents.
And so that's at the 9 to 12 month period. That's kind of where I was driving at. So the first few months, it's going to be less than that.
Yeah, this is at
Full
stabilization. Yeah, once the project's stabilized, this is in year one. And again, it goes up if they raise their rents 10%. Presumably, this number goes up by 10%. This is consistent with the pilots you did for the other projects in town, like Life's. Again, the annual service charge is based off of the annual gross revenues. That makes it a pretty easy number to calculate, so that there's no, literally, they'll show you in an audit report every dollar that they received. We'll calculate the annual service charge and it'll be paid. It's a 30-year agreement. The annual service charge commences after the certificate of occupancy. So even though they may have only, so if to say there's $2 million in the first 6 months, well, then the rent will be 10% of the $2 million. So it's at the end of the day a percentage of whatever they receive. There's also a 1% of the annual service charge, so that'd be 1% of the $570,000. That's an administrative fee annually to the borough to manage the financial agreement. And then there's periodic reports and audits that are also required through the financial agreement. So we tried to do a total value estimate, and this is projecting out 30 years, so it's, got take it for that. Annual service charge, assuming it goes up about 3% a year over the course of this project, that'll generate about $27.5 million of money to the village that currently won't receive because, as you know, this is exempt property. So that's 27.5 million new ratables to the village. The structured parking facility, the 255 units, is valued at about $5.8 million. That's the cost of that structured parking that they're building and then contributing for public parking. They've agreed to make a $1.1 million commitment to the borough to be used for either for any purpose we want. It's presumably at least initially targeted to the rescue squad relocation. You may recall when we met last time, that number was, I think, $750,000, and through the final negotiations, we were able to get that a little number higher. They're also making a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so overall there's a 20% affordable housing, 10% is going on-site, and 10% is through the same formula, 20,000 per units off-site for $440,000 to your trust fund. And then we valued the on-site affordable housing at about $2.4 million. I was using a $110,000 per unit number roughly for affordable housing unit. So in the end, you know, this is obviously a significant financial benefit to the village. The redevelopment agreement, which will be the subject of a resolution later in tonight's meeting, it describes the project, it sets forth the timeline, which I will go through with you. It requires that they do get LEED certification, I forget which level, but a LEED certification for the project. Important to Trustee Bauer's request, we have negotiated an easement that will allow for the construction of a bike path by the township. There's a 10-foot, there's more than 10 feet, 10-foot easement, but it allows for a bike path which would run alongside the backside of the parking garage, for now dead ending into the property that is adjacent to it. This is the agreement that sets forth the affordable housing payment requirement, the rescue squad relocation payment, and guaranteeing the 255 public parking spaces in the parking garage. So one of the things that we also, because we're really not getting paid cash here, we thought it was important to try and provide you with a dollar amount that you could attribute to the sale of your land. And we thought the best way to do that was to, really the two things that are contributions to the village that are in the form of a payment and in the form of a facility, comes to about $6.9 million. So the structured parking facility, the 255 spaces, if we had to build them ourselves, that would be worth about $5.8 million. And then, of course, the $1 million cash contribution that we'll receive. That, one of the ways to think of the value of land is on a per unit basis. So that would be about $35,750 per market rate unit. Affordable housing units are generally valued at zero. The price per acre is $2.6 million. So effectively, in a combination of cash and a parking garage, we're going to receive about $2.6 million per acre for your property, $35,750 per residential unit. Those are very right on the market for what's appropriate for this project. Here's probably what's most interesting to people. Where are we going? What we're going to do next? They're pretty far along in the site plan application, which they hope to file with the planning board almost immediately. Sign the agreement tomorrow. I think they're planning on filing their site plan application immediately thereafter. We're going to begin the process of trying to be able to build the rescue squad. That should hopefully begin about October 2013. One of the first things you'll see between the July and October date is they'll immediately be doing borings in the lot. That's going to, we've already started to coordinate with the parking authority, but you'll see right away that there'll be boring. That could happen within the next 2 weeks. But jumping back to the timetable, we hope to finish the construction documents. They would hope to finish the construction documents for their project in December of 13, finalize their loan documents in March of 2014, and the closing on the sale of the property itself, which would occur after all these things have occurred, would be April of next year. Our goal would be to have the rescue squad completed before that. Our current expectation is that there will be a 1 or 2 month lag between the closing on the property when the rescue squad has to leave and the completion of the new rescue squad, and we'll get into a little bit where that will go and how that'll work out. So we are currently anticipating that for some period of time, maybe no period of time, but hopefully a short period of time, the rescue squad will probably have to relocate to the firehouse. In June 2014, commencement of construction. The garage gets completed first, and then the mixed-use project April of 2016. So you sort of laid out, it will take some time to get this done, but it's not an insignificant project. I think our expectation is that we'll beat most of these timetables, but we want to be conservative. So for temporary parking, we've been analyzing a number of different options in town. You may recall that Jonathan Rose identified a number of locations. We've had several meetings with the parking authority and the executive director. We're still sort of in that process, but I think we all feel pretty confident that there is sufficient spaces throughout the, opportunities throughout the village to allocate parking. It's 184 spaces. Allocate those people throughout the village for the period of construction. Importantly, Jonathan Rose is responsible for paying us $200,000 to pay for all those costs. So, for example, if we find a lot where we have to pave it, we have money to pave it. If we have to have a shuttle to shuttle people from back and forth from the new lot, we'll have money towards that cost as well. So there's $200,000 coming from Jonathan Rose to be spent on the temporary parking. So the rescue squad, which is a pretty critical component of what we're trying to achieve here, we looked at a number of different locations throughout the village. When I say we, Barry and his staff, not us. Looked at a number of different locations. This was identified as the best location. It's on 2nd Street. It was going to be the site, I think, of the temporary, the previous speaker was speaking about the temporary location for the offices for the village. That's no longer going to happen. So that piece of property is a great location and works out nicely in terms of putting a reasonably nice rescue squad that meets all the requirements of the rescue squad in the village, public safety and otherwise. Here's a rendering of what that would look like. It's going to, a couple things we had to accommodate for, a 30-foot apron that's designed to allow the rescue squad, the ambulances to pull out and be cleaned, be brought out during the day and park. We needed some parking that's directly behind the rescue squad for those the first people that are coming on and immediately leaving in the squad. They need to be able to park and leave. You'll remember on the previous picture that there's plenty of parking. You can't see it, it's too small. But on adjacent to both sides of the rescue squad, there's plenty of public parking that will be allocated to those people that are staying overnight or are not coming there on an emergency basis to park. So we'll have to allocate in those municipal parking lots some rescue squad member only parking for those people that are either staying overnight or coming to meetings or otherwise. The rescue squad, we've had a lot of meetings and conversations with them. It's going to accommodate 3 to 4 vehicles. It's going to have a storage area and office on the first floor. It's going to be a 2-floor building. Second floor, one of the things that we tried to accommodate in the building is the village apparently doesn't have sufficient shelter for emergencies. So the goal is to design, and we've done some preliminary designs. There will be a new design coming within the next week or so, but a shelter for people for cots, up to 30 to 40 cots in case of an emergency, a bathroom, and then for the rescue squad, separate facilities where they would have a kitchen, a common area, bedrooms for overnight shifts, a full bathroom and shower facility. And then on the exterior, we're going to need some on-site and off-site parking, as I described to you, generator and storage. So we believe that all these things can fit on site and can be done within the budget of the $1.1 million.
And did you say the square footage of the building, or anticipated square footage? I didn't see it on there, so.
It's a little more than 5,000 square feet, 5,000 to 6,000.
5,000 to 6,000 square feet. I'm just repeating because people can't.
5,000 to
hear you.
6,000 square feet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
What is the current
Yeah,
square
that's the question.
square foot of the existing structure that they're in now? Would you have any sense?
You know, Barry?
No, I know it's smaller.
Small.
We're using 2,600.
I think it's about 20.
They're saying 2,600 square feet currently.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
and
one level too, so that's.
it's one level, and the big thing, I think, one of the most significant differences is the area for emergencies. For
I get it. Thank you.
Okay. Importantly, while we have probably 2 of the most critical steps with you today, there's going to be a number of things we're still going to have to accomplish between now and, when I say us, I mean the village trustees are going to have to act on, consider, deal with over the next couple months and year. First, we're going to have to do, because the rescue squad is being, the current contemplation is the rescue squad will be done by Jonathan Rose as part of a redevelopment project. The rescue squad land is in a redevelopment area, but if there's no redevelopment plan. So we're going to have to adopt the redevelopment plan, go through that process for that particular site, the 2nd Street site. That's a plan. It'll be obviously much simpler than the one you did for 3rd and Valley, but we'll have to do a plan and go through the planning board and village trustee process. We're going to have to negotiate and authorize a rescue squad construction agreement. We have a draft prepared. Again, the expectation was Jonathan Rose would do that. It's most likely to be a cost-plus contract. We'll go through a process where we competitively bid the subcontracts. They'll oversee the process. They'll get a fee for that, and that negotiation will have to happen. These things all have to happen before we close on the land. They're conditions precedent to the closing of on the land sale. We'll get to finalize the temporary parking arrangements, obtain the trustees' approval as applicable. It may be that we have to rent some property from some private individuals. Again, that money is being set aside and paid for by Jonathan Rose, but the trustees will have to approve that temporary parking. We're going to have to negotiate and authorize the public parking agreement. We want to make sure, and we've had a number of meetings with the parking authority on how this will operate, but we got to make sure that those 255 spaces not only are there in perpetuity, but we all understand who's maintaining them, who's overseeing, what's the security for them, a number of significant operational issues, so that how that property is met, those spaces are managed going forward. This is one that is sort of a belt and suspenders. The current plan is, in order to move the rescue squad forward first, before the land closing occurs, Jonathan Rose has agreed to front the cost, the $1.1 million. But if something happens and we are unable to close, we can't meet a closing contingency, and the deal doesn't move forward, they will have fronted the cost for a rescue squad. We will have a new location for the rescue squad. So as a standby, we're recommending that we do a bond ordinance that we don't expect to ever use. But short of that, the village would have to sort of come up with the money to return the $1.1 million for the brand new rescue squad that we would own to Jonathan Rose. The only other choice to avoid this would be to have the rescue squad in temporary facilities for up to a year to 2 years, which didn't seem like a viable alternative to anybody. So it's, again, like I said, a fully funded ordinance. That's never expected to be issued. But in order to protect the village, in the event that something would occur, you would end up with you would ultimately get your value back because you would have a clean piece of property that you could sell to somebody else. But the rescue squad would have been located and the money would have been spent. And then we have a number of title issues we still have to clear up. Nothing of any too significant. We have, but we're still working through those issues. And then the electric wires have to be relocated. We've already had conversations with PSA&G. So those are the significant things to do next. But for today, next steps are the financial agreement, the redevelopment agreement. That's going to be immediately followed by the site plan application and efforts to begin to secure the temporary parking. We'll pretty quickly be finalizing the design for the new rescue squad and negotiating the couple of agreements I described above.
Thank you for what I think was a very clear presentation. Before we move on to the public comment period, are there any questions from any trustees?
Do you know if Jonathan Rose has done environmental due diligence on the area toward the tracks? In other words, not the former Cumberland Farms area along Valley Street, but
other
the
than reviewing
other area?
Information we already have. You haven't done any borings, have you?
We haven't done borings yet.
If you guys, if you're going to comment.
Yeah. So we've done a phase 1 study. I'm Paul Woody from Jonathan Rose Companies. We've done a phase 1 study on the entire site, and we will be doing borings, but mostly for geotech examination, starting in a couple weeks.
Okay, and is the 10 to 15 foot area, is that going to change title, but we're going to reserve an easement at the closing? Okay, in perpetuity?
Correct.
Okay. I had a third question. I don't remember what it was right now. Sorry.
I have a number of questions and some concerns, but first, Mr. Baumann, thank you very much for the presentation. I was really hoping we were going to see something like this, certainly for our benefit and most definitely for the public's benefit. So thank you. I appreciate the thoroughness and professionalism. It answered a number of my questions, but I do still have a few more. Teeing up on Trustee Bauer's question about environmental issues. So what happens if you find something, or you find, there's buried dinosaur bones, or an extinct turtle, or something on the site? How does that impact the project?
If it's something that can be managed, we'll clean it up. We'll come back to the trustees, explain.
At their expense? Is
At
that-
our expense. We're responsible for delivering the property clean.
Well, when you say our, are you representing the village, or are you representing them?
I've always represented you. I've
Okay,
never
so
represented them.
any cleanup is done
I'm
at the
sorry, I do speak that way. When I think of our, I think of us.
Okay,
We're
sorry.
all in this together.
So any cleanup is done at the village's expense?
Yeah, but that wouldn't happen until we met with you and described the situation, decided whether you still want to go forward, identified the cost. The expectation is there shouldn't be any. But.
Right. Knock on wood. Thank you. With respect to the parking deck, you talked about obviously the benefit and the value to the community, but I was reading the redevelopment agreement, and I want to read something here that I think is worth noting, saying that parking spaces will be regulated by the township, but the fees for the use of the public parking spaces will be set at a rate that will be sufficient to, along with any other funds paid to the township or the township parking authority, fund all garage operating expenses allocable to the public parking spaces, including but not limited to reasonable reserves, capital improvements, repairs and replacements, taxes, service charge, and payments in lieu of taxes, all as set forth in the parking agreement. So it sounds like the village is responsible, and again, this is layman's terms, so forgive me, the village is responsible for paying for the maintenance of our portion of the parking deck,
Yeah,
right?
I think the way we contemplate it is the best way to do it will be for one entity to operate, maintain, and manage the entire deck. That's the expectation. And then we would be responsible for our allocable share of whatever that will be. So round numbers I generally use is $500 per space. So 255 spaces times $500 is generally sort of a ballpark of what it might cost for us to operate, maintain, do the caulking when it becomes necessary, set up a reserve for capital improvements. But we're going to be responsible for 255 of the spaces of those costs. They'll be verified, they'll be audited, and this will sort of be set forth in that agreement.
That's $500 per year?
Per space per year.
Per space
space per year.
Okay.
And just to put that in context, and I think this is really important for anyone that's watching, I believe commuters currently pay about $300 a year. So just to sort of stay status quo, theoretically, and this is up to the parking authority, of course, they'd have to raise rates to be $800 a year to cover those additional expenses.
Absolutely. The first place covered parking is by definition generally more expensive. But putting that aside, $300 a year would not be sufficient to, right now the parking authority earns revenues off this lot, about $80,000 a year. And then the parking authority also has very nominal operational maintenance expenses for a surface parking lot. I guess that's obvious. So those two things, the goal would be to make those two things up. So the parking authority, I think their goal would not to still have revenues and then cover these expenses. They have two choices. They spread it over the system, or they put it all on the future commuters in the parking garage.
Right.
Just to be fair, we are already subsidizing the maintenance of that lot. We've been paying for the paving, the striping, and plowing. So we pay for it, we subsidize those spaces now. So you could say, maybe we'll continue to subsidize the spaces at the same rate. So instead of them paying $500, they'll pay $300, or we can say the subsidies ended and now you're going to have to pay $500 a year, which are $50 a month.
We've argued
But we are subsidizing it now, so it's not, and we are paying for the maintenance now.
Right, but it's not $500 per space. And we've argued for a long time the price there is artificially low, quite frankly,
Well, it
based,
doesn't even
based,
cover- it
based
doesn't
on
even
supply
cover
and
the cost
demand.
necessarily.
But clearly, the fee there, the cost will need to rise. Whether it's to $800 or whether it's $400, the cost will need to
You're
rise.
assuming that the only revenue that could come from that would just be from daily commuters. There's other revenues that could come from there. So for instance, overnight parking is a big demand on weekends. They could charge for that. We also currently don't charge for parking on Saturday and Sunday. They could charge on Saturday and Sunday. So the whole makeup for the revenue source does not have to come from commuters. It could come from other sources.
And the oversubscribed.
And we oversubscribe too. So so there may be an increase. I don't think it's as much as you're leaving it to be.
I'm just telling you the numbers he just said. And so as I understand the numbers in the spaces, I think you said there's...
I think there's currently 184,
correct.
and we're going to get 255.
Right. But I don't know if this has been, there's been talk about moving spaces from the New Jersey Transit lot into this deck. So conceptually, there would be not much of a net gain in the end.
The net gain we would get if we do that swap would be whatever spaces we keep in the Jersey Transit lot. So if all the daily permit users went to this space and we didn't have anything else, there was, I think there's a very little net. but there would still be some spaces remaining in the Jersey Transit lot that we would keep. We maybe do part of it as a plaza, but we may keep some of them. I forgot the exact number. We were talking, I think, about 30.
And where does that stand? Is it, I mean, are there discussions ongoing with transit?
They've had initial discussions, but I don't know where the next one's going, so.
Okay.
We have to keep it going. We have to put pressure
Michael,
on
can I
it.
interrupt for a second on the parking?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions, but go
I
ahead.
just
go ahead.
wanted to understand, there's 188 spaces on the whole site?
Correct.
Right now, not just on the
I
commuter?
think it's 184, I think, but yeah, something like
Okay.
that,
It's
yeah.
133 for commuters, 50
Okay,
plus the
just want to
business.
make sure that was the right number. Okay, thank you.
You talked about temporary parking, and I know I've seen some internal documents. I don't know, is that public? Is there any deals that are codified that you can say out publicly where some of those
I think we can
spaces
safely
are?
say we spoke to Mr. Said about his property, possibly. I think we can safely say that Jonathan Rose identified a number of spaces throughout, and then I think the Parking Authority may have some ideas. But there's clearly some opportunities for spaces, and because we have $200,000 allocated to it, I think we feel pretty comfortable that we'll be able to find some space that we might have to pave or pay for a shuttle to get people back and forth from a further distance. Generally speaking, during this time, sometimes the number of users drops down because people decide that it's just too much trouble. I'm just going to have someone drop me off at the train station. That might be 20% of that number might fall away. So it's going to be a bit of an art and a science. Clearly, the executive director of the Parking Authority feels like he's got a lot of solutions.
Okay, thank you. When you talked about the timeline, you talked about anticipating approval by the planning board by July 1st. I mean, that's 2 months away, and just having been in town and been doing this for a number of years, planning board approvals are inherently long and painful. I know you already went through them with the redevelopment plan, but won't there need to be traffic studies and parking studies and all these other experts that need to come and testify for a project of this size, as we have done historically for other similar projects?
Yeah, all that's true. They've been working pretty hard to get ready, so I think they feel like they're going to be able to hit the ground running. They've already had preliminary meetings with planning board professionals, so I believe the process has begun informally, so I think that's why they're feeling. But, I think it's aggressive, but I'd rather them go aggressive than take our time.
I just want to be realistic,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
managing expectations. That's my
Absolutely.
job.
Well, the key expectation is how fast we can get the building built. Everything up until then,
Yep.
we'll slip and slide.
With respect to the rescue squad, I'm glad we talked about the location. I'm glad you showed a concept plan. That was helpful. Help me understand the whole idea of the cost. I mean, that's still sort of nagging at me. The $1.1 million, I know that's all in, and again, for all intents and purposes, it's a 1.1 million check, and we could theoretically, right, cash that and say we don't want to do a rescue squad. I'm not saying
Yes.
we're going to do that, but theoretically we could.
We could.
But that's all in, so that has to include architects' fees and construction and, build out and the entire soup to nuts project for a new rescue squad. Do we have real tangible estimates from an architect, from somebody of what the project's going to cost? Just like we did earlier tonight for Village Hall, all in, what do you think the project will cost?
I think because it's not the most, it's not a particularly complicated building. I mean, there's an elevator, that's probably the most expensive thing in it. It's a big garage with a building on top. The sense is that 1.1 million should be a pretty good number, and we'll be able to fine tune that pretty quickly. You sound doubtful.
What's that?
You sound doubtful.
I am doubtful. I just think maybe construction alone, but by the time you fit it out, and again, design it, architects, all that stuff. And the other question, I guess, like for example, the concept drawings you shared here, and there were previous concept drawings done on a prior site. Are those deducted, or those sort of sunk costs, and the 1.1's above and beyond that?
They retained I think they retained someone for $5,000 to do those drawings that they didn't charge us for, Jonathan.
And likewise for like this concept plan that's in here?
Yeah, that was all part of they hired an architect, a local architect.
So that doesn't come out of the 1.1?
They already spent the money, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but it wasn't, I mean, it was actually sort of a good evidence of Jonathan Rowe's cooperative commitment to our project. They spent a lot of time with us trying to figure out how to relocate the rescue squad. We went through a couple drawings already with them on a couple different locations. They funded that, all along the way.
Okay, just a couple more questions. With respect to the pilot itself, I understand, as you explained it, it's calculated based on 10% of gross revenue. My understanding, and I'm clearly not an expert in this area, there's two ways of calculating, either 10% by percentage of revenue or percentage of construction costs.
Correct.
Help us, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know some projects are done by, I think it's 2% of construction costs, which would have been a pilot of 1.2 million versus the 570. Help me
Right.
understand the rationale for that
So
calculation.
It could be 2% of construction costs, it could be 15% of annual gross rents. 10% is the floor, not the maximum.
Okay.
So the pilot really could be a number of different numbers. But at the end of the day, the pilot really is supposed to be designed, what does the developer need to do his project? It's a but-for test. A lot of municipalities think of it as, what's the best we can get for it? But it's really designed to, what's the most he needs to locate his project in their facility. And so the number was selected mostly by looking at what his return. So the return number that we showed you, the 6%, 6 point something percent number, it's really driven by what they need to be successful and to go forward in the project. If we had negotiated, for example, to have it be 2% of construction costs, which it could have been, they couldn't do the project. Maybe we'd have to pay for our parking. We'd have to figure out another way, but they would not have been able to get the project underwritten. They would have been able to commit the equity for that type of number because they wouldn't be making any money on the project. So they wouldn't do the project. So we would have to come up with another way. So the formulas have all different ways that you can attack them, but the basic premise is, when we're handling it on behalf of the village, is we want to make sure that we give them a pilot that's sufficient for them to do the project but not create a windfall. And that's why we go through the trouble of making sure we understand all their numbers, what their rents are going to be. I mean, everyone I think would agree that those rents are pretty, I think they're pretty high. I hope they get them, and I think they will. But that's the rents they need to get the return, which I think is a reasonable return, not a huge return. So the number is really driven by what is the project needs, not really what the formulas would allow, or even perhaps what we want, because we would certainly take 20% of gross rents if we could, because that would be better for the village, but you wouldn't have a project, so you would really get nothing.
When we initially discussed this, we talked about certain things like breaking out the parking deck and whether we were going to pay for it ourselves. But the idea was that we didn't want to add any money. We wanted all the costs to be covered by the project, including so the parking deck and the rescue squad being the two. So that didn't cost that money. But if we went ahead and paid for those, then obviously we could go to the 15% of rent because we'd be laying out the.
And the last thing that I didn't show, but they're called staged increases. So every 6 years, you compare the pilot to otherwise applicable taxes. So for example, you compare it by 0, 20, 40, 60, 80%. So in the last 6 years, for example, if 80% of otherwise applicable taxes is higher than the pilot would be, they pay 80% of otherwise applicable taxes. So the number I gave you was just sort of the straight annual service charge, but we actually negotiate with them. And in this case, with them, it's more aggressive than it is for BIFAS. BIFAS has a longer period for his step up. These guys have a shorter period. I don't know if they realize that. They do now.
Uh-oh.
But they're going to sign. So I think we'll get closer to otherwise applicable taxes quicker with them.
And to that point, and this will be my last question, what would full taxes on the site be? I mean, based on that size rateable, and do you have that number? And kind of the corollary to that, one of the things we had asked for last time, and I don't know if you came prepared or Mr. Lewis has it, is to show a comparison of the impact of a pilot on residential property owners. I know there's a lot of confusion and debate about pilots and their benefits and whatnot, and we talked about doing a presentation so people could understand.
You say how does it impact taxpayers?
Yeah.
So the impact on the taxpayers is $570,000.
I think the question is more for an individual taxpayer, and how does it impact the taxpayer in relation, partly because we share a school system with Maplewood, and
if they paid full freight, what would be the impact?
When you look at the whole picture, we've done an Excel spreadsheet years ago showing that the savings, which I don't remember what it was per resident on a small pilot, but it wasn't an enormous, but it actually because we share a school system with Maplewood, it actually makes it that the pilot becomes advantageous to the residents as a whole when we do a pilot.
Yeah, I don't know if...
And vice versa, when Maplewood does one, it hurts South Orange. But they're paying 60% of that portion that's made up to the schools, plus that piece of property, the assessed value comes off the formula because the two towns their share, the 58.42% is based on the total assessed values. So if this piece of property was assessed at $10 million, that $10 million now comes out of the equation.
Right.
So
So-
pilot becomes very advantageous when we're doing one, because we share a school district. If we didn't share a school district, it wouldn't be so clearly advantageous.
So what Ellen may have done a separate analysis. We traded emails. She was going to work on hers. I estimated that the otherwise applicable taxes were about $1.3 million, of which the village would earn $361,000 as compared to the $570. So basically double. Total tax, if it was otherwise applicable taxes, it would be double.
Right.
Of that, though, the village gets, let's see, on a, the way I do it, it's 0.96 cents, but, so the village gets about half of what the school district usually gets, right?
Well, but no, it's usually about a quarter to the village, quarter to the county, and half to the district. Rough number, real rough
Right, so the
numbers.
village gets half what the school district gets, right?
Yeah, some said it differently. Yes,
Yeah,
you're
right.
correct.
Right, so, but my estimate was the village would, if it was otherwise taxable taxes, was going to get 360 to 400 as compared to the 570. So you get 170 to the good. If that makes
But
sense.
the school gets nothing, right? It's a difference.
School gets zero.
The school budget doesn't change. The school will still get the exact same amount of money. It's just a matter of who's paying it. So the money's passed on to the residents, 42% to South Orange residents, 58% to Maplewood residents. But if the school budget does not change because of a pilot.
There's actually some interesting legislation on that point, because the school district, as you know, doesn't have to pay for tax appeals, right? So whenever there's a tax appeal, you got to kick in the money. You don't get the money back from the school district either, so it kind of goes both ways.
If there was no pilot and they were paying $1.3 million, the school budget still wouldn't change. It would just mean that each resident would pay a couple of dollars less.
But
That was all my
At
questions.
the end of the day, I'm recommending to you the annual service charge number and calculation, because I think the project needs it to succeed. It's the right number for this project, for this to go forward. And to use one of the other formulas, the project wouldn't be able to sustain itself.
I have a question for someone from Rose. You talked for just a second about the work-live concept for the first floor. I know a number of residents want to know what the first floor facade's going to look like and what's going to be in there. So if someone could speak to...
Yeah, that might be a good
what it
question
is.
for the Jonathan Rose.
Yeah,
You talk about the flex space, not
the flex space, and if there's going to be any retail, I know people want to know what's going to be on that first floor.
Right, so the live work units are going to be on the
3rd Street.
on 3rd Street, yeah, on the first floor of 3rd Street, and there'll be a slightly sunken courtyard that will be screened from the road, but will be publicly accessible, and they're going to be, those units will be floor-through units.
I guess speak right now, right.
Those units will be floor-through units that are accessible from the hallway of the apartment building, and also the front of the building, right? So they'll have little landscape terraces in front of them that provides access from the street, and so essentially the room in the front could be a bedroom, or it could be, an office for an accountant or an attorney who wants to set up, a little shop there and have clients come see them. So that'll be along 3rd Street, and then along Valley Street, there'll be 3,000 square feet of retail at the corner where the entrance is, and we've underwritten rents there where we think we can get, we can be picky about the tenant we choose. So it could be, we're aiming for a cafe or some sort of light food service that will activate the plaza that's being built along Valley Street, and then the remainder of Valley Street, part of it will be amenity space for the building that will be active, like a gym or a party space that will sort of activate that plaza, and then part of it will be residential units.
Okay, great, thank you.
Joe, I have the third question I remembered. Is it 10% affordable housing?
It's 10% off-site and 10% on-site.
Okay. And we have a sign-off document by DCA or something like that?
No, you can't get anything from DCA. We're doing our best to comply with the rules that are completely in flux with no staff.
Because they keep changing.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's 10 and 10, so we should
Yeah.
have no problem.
It's 22 and 21 because it actually is 43, so it's 21 on-site, 22 off-site
Okay.
contribution year.
And that concept was discussed with Sean, who's the director down at COA,
Bless.
and he you know, as unofficially as he could, gave it the blessing that he thought that was a good effort at compliance, and, you know, it's.
Yeah,
such a
from my
part of
experience,
it.
you guys are doing a much better job about tackling affordable housing than many of the other towns.
We want to keep it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Baumann.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
At this time,